Imagine dying in ancient Rome, but no funeral comes, no procession, no fire, no grave, no family saying goodbye. Your body is simply left where it fell. To us, that sounds tragic. But to many ancient Romans, there was another, more frightening possibility, because death wasn't necessarily the end. And if the dead weren't treated properly, Romans feared they might not stay gone. For Romans, a funeral wasn't simply a way of disposing of a body. It was a transition from the world of the living to the world of the dead. When someone died, relatives could close their eyes, call their name, wash the body, dress it, and prepare it for the funeral. Wealthy families could organise elaborate processions with musicians and mourners, but eventually every funeral reached the important part. The dead had to be properly laid to rest. Depending on the period, this could mean cremation or burial. During periods when cremation was common, the body was burned on a funeral pyre. The remaining bones and ashes could then be collected and placed in an urn. Later, burial became increasingly common, and the dead generally belonged outside the city. Tombs lined roads leading away from Rome, creating a boundary between the living city and its dead. But these tombs weren't simply places to leave bodies. They preserved names, families, and memories. Romans continued interacting with their dead. Families visited tombs, they brought offerings, they remembered deceased relatives during special occasions. Now imagine the opposite. No funeral, no burial, no cremation, no tomb, no remembrance. For some Romans, that wasn't merely disrespectful. It could be dangerous. Roman beliefs about the dead were complicated and changed over time, but stories repeatedly described spirits who could trouble the living, especially when death had gone wrong. Someone died violently. Someone disappeared. A body wasn't recovered, or the proper rites weren't performed. The frightening question wasn't only, what happens to the body? It was, what happens to the person? Had they actually entered the world of the dead, or were they somehow still here? Romans had traditions involving troublesome spirits of the dead, sometimes associated with beings called lemures. And that brings us to one of Rome's strangest festivals, the Lemuria. It happened during May, and the ritual took place at night. According to the Roman poet Ovid, the head of the household would rise during the night and walk barefoot. He would wash his hands. Then he would take something surprisingly ordinary, black beans. He would throw the beans behind himself while repeating a ritual formula intended to protect himself and his family. And he wasn't supposed to look behind him. After repeating the ritual, he would make noise with bronze and command the spirits to leave. 9 times, think about that. The Romans built aqueducts. They constructed enormous cities. Their roads crossed vast distances. And yet inside a Roman house at night, someone could be throwing beans over his shoulder because troublesome spirits needed to be driven away. But there was another reality. Not everybody in Rome was wealthy. A rich Roman might receive an enormous funeral, an impressive tomb. A poor Roman couldn't afford anything comparable. Funeral associations existed that could help members receive proper burial and remembrance, because even without wealth, what happened after death still mattered. And this reveals something fascinating about Roman society. Death wasn't simply one moment, it was a process. The body had to leave the community of the living. The remains had to be handled, rituals had to be performed, and the dead had to be remembered. When everything happened correctly, the boundary between living and dead remained clear. But when that process was interrupted, the boundary became uncertain. And uncertainty is where ghost stories begin. Imagine a Roman house at night. Everyone is asleep, then you hear footsteps. You look into an empty room, nobody is there. Today you might search for a physical explanation. But an ancient Roman could interpret that sound very differently. Maybe somebody hadn't left. Maybe a ritual hadn't been performed. Maybe someone had been forgotten. That's what makes Roman attitudes toward death so interesting. They didn't simply fear the dead. They remembered them. They visited them. They honoured them. The dead remained connected to the family. There was simply a difference between a dead person, peacefully remembered, and one who had reason to return. So what happened to the unburied dead in ancient Rome? There was no single answer, and Roman practices changed across centuries. But being denied proper funerary treatment could mean much more than simply having no grave. Because for some Romans, the frightening possibility wasn't that your body would disappear.